We thank you and happy to. Oh God in heaven, we thank you so much for all your blessings to us. How you touch our hearts in so many different ways. Yes, the music, the solemnness, the beauty that we see in your character. And that you were working to bring us more and more into harmony with your mind and your ways, your loving patience with us. So now we ask for a special blessing upon Hannah as she presents to us the study as we continue on this Sabbath day. We are so grateful for everyone here, for all of your people, wherever they are, that you send a special blessing to each one. Thank you for your hand upon us. And may our eyes and hearts be open, and may we be filled with your wisdom as you lead and guide Anna in this study. And we thank you for it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that beautiful prayer, Jackie. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I hit share screen. Then what do I hit? Whiteboard. I got whiteboard, iPhone. I don't have an iPhone. Advanced files, basic, share sound, optimize for video clip, and then just share.
Do you have the file open that you want to share?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I do. Okay.
I do that too. You have to have the file open.
Okay, it's open. So I just hit share.
Hit share screen and then select that.
Oh, okay, I got it selected. Now can everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay, participants can now see your screen. I got that little message on there. So I'm assuming that everybody can see it because I'm not getting any.
It shows overview of what was covered previously.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, so what I'm planned to do, and I have not put any kind of like study together on this. So what I am going to ask is for everybody's participation in helping me explain it, because I am just going to be reading it through. And if anybody has a hard time hearing me, please speak up. If I'm talking too loud or not reading too loud, if I'm reading too fast, please chime in, let me know that I need to slow down a little bit. As I have this whole screen open on my desktop here, I guess I'm not able to see the chat, just like, you know, everybody else is, says when they do the same thing. So you're gonna need to speak up instead of leaving it on the chat because I can't see it. So let's go ahead and get started. It says here, overview of what was covered previously. Previously, ancient and modern Israel have been compared. And these are the key points. And the board work. And I hope this is big enough for everybody to see. It's quite big on my screen. I don't know what everybody else is seeing.
It looks good. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Jackie. Okay, so here's two columns. Ancient Israel on the left and modern Israel is on the right. And I guess this is a comparison. So ancient Israel is at the end of 400-year prophecy, when modern Israel is at the end of 1260-year prophecy. Ancient Israel, during the darkness and captivity, Sabbath truth was lost. Modern Israel, during the darkness and captivity, Sabbath truth is lost. said the same. God raised up a deliverer, Moses. He is going to draw out the people out of the pagan nations that surround them. And in modern Israel, God raised up a deliverer, William Miller, who is going to draw out a people out of apostate Protestantism. Ancient Israel Sabbath was reintroduced. Modern Israel Sabbath reintroduced. Ancient Israel prophet that they looked at was Moses, the book of the Decalogue. In modern Israel, we looked at Ellen White. She is the prophet for Adventism. Ancient Israel, the same person who drew God's people out wrote the books. Modern Israel, distinction between Miller, who draws out God's people, and White, who writes the books. In Alpha history, people fail to be fit to do the work. The work should have been completed quickly. They could have conquered the Canaan quickly and get fit soon after entering the Canaan, but they continued to go into apostasy, idolatry, held onto parts of Egypt. And in modern, same thing for the Millerites. They should have been preparing the way for the second advent and find it completed in the 1860s history. A quote from 1868 made it clear. They didn't because they were not fit to do that work. They had also held on to tenets of Protestantism, which is the Laodicean condition. It is the Protestant idea of millennium that they held on to make oneself comfortable here on earth, because we don't know when Christ will come back. We know it will be far into the future. Okay. Any comments so far on those two columns before we move on? Does anybody want to help explain that, or any insights, comments?
It just recaps the board, and I think you had a picture of the board at the beginning. It just recaps the same thing from the previous presentation as well, that comparing ancient to modern and looking at the 400 years and the 1260 years, the darkness, captivity, loss of Sabbath, raising up a messenger, and then a prophet, and reinstitute the Sabbath. So that's what I got out of all that. It was just another way to look at what's on the board. So it was good side by side.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Elaine. Okay, let me go down to the next paragraph. Okay, the Adventists in the 1850s history held on to the same ideas of the millennium as did Protestantism. Since it took so long from the first Advent to the 1798, they did not expect his coming to be that soon. So it is the same mindset of making oneself comfortable here on earth, because we don't know how long it will be till Christ returns. This was the Laodicean condition. It was a failure in both cases. And here's the board work. I'll let you look at that for a little while. Let me know when you're ready for me to move on.
I'm good. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm good.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I know it's kind of blurry, but I don't know if that's my eyes, because my eyes are always blurry.
Well, sometimes trying to get
But-
the board work is blurry.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if that was just me or was it really blurry. Okay. But it's still readable. I can still read it.
Mhm.
Okay. Failure, failure, success. Ready or not? It's a success, right?
Right.
Okay, so previously we described how the idolatry of ancient Israel is the idolatry of Egypt, the Apis bull, as it relates to the king, characteristics of the king. That is what they wanted in their God and also in their visible leadership. When they asked for a king, they were given Saul. Saul has all the characteristics of this Apis bull. He is tall, respectable, powerful. He can lead them in battle. They desired the characteristics of Saul. This Apis bull, they were not saying that they were bowing before another god. They were saying this is the characteristics of our true God, Jehovah. That is how they justified their idolatry. They have taken Jehovah, the true God, and ascribed to him the characteristics of the pagan deity. And when they are bowing before this golden calf, they are saying they are worshiping Jehovah, but these are his characteristics, and they want to be able to see him. When they come out of the Babylon, they let go of the image. They no longer need to see him, but they hold on to their characteristics, and that is the problem when the Christ comes. And please excuse my cat. She's howling in the background. I think she's going deaf. That's why she's doing that. So poor gal, she's old. They are looking for the Apis bull, but when Christ comes, they are not able to recognize him. When Christ comes, he is going to re-educate them through parable teaching. The parable teaching is used literal to build. Let me read that over again. The parable teaching is used literal to build a spiritual application. In literal, the shepherd is God and the sheep is you. So it is taking literal story or picture or history or culture to make a spiritual application. That is his cure to their misunderstanding about the nature of their king. I want to pick up a couple of thoughts from Desire of Ages 211.3 and Desire of Ages 212.4 and Desire of Ages 213.2. This is where Jesus is dragged before the Sanhedrin on the charge of Sabbath breaking. The time, the place, the occasion, the intensity of feeling that pervaded the assembly all combined to make the works of Jesus before the Sanhedrin the more impressive. The highest religious authorities of the nations were seeking the life of him who declared himself the restorer of Israel. The Lord of the Sabbath was arraigned before an earthly tribunal to answer the charge of breaking the Sabbath law. When he so fearlessly declared his mission, his judges looked upon him with astonishment and rage, but his words were unanswerable. They could not condemn him. He denied the right of the priests and rabbis to question him or to interfere with his work. They were invested with no such authority. Their claims were based upon their own pride and arrogance. He refused to plead guilty of their charges or to be chastised by them. So another pause to ask for any insight, any explanation, anything that popped into your mind. Feel free to speak up, please. Anyone? On any of this?
Anna, just a comment. Back up a bit. The last slide. Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
I hear you just fine. Yes.
Okay. It's talking about Saul.
Okay, you want me
I
to
think
keep
it's
going
the
up?
first paragraph. Yeah. This was kind of going through my mind as you read this. Okay. Down
This one.
more.
Down more. Okay, Saul has
all the characteristics of this Apis bull. He is tall, respectable, powerful. He can lead them in battle. They desired the characteristics of Saul. You know, it sounds very good, doesn't it? It doesn't sound like an Apis bull. As I'm contemplating this, I see it as their problem too is that they want something visible. And this Apis bull with Saul was visible, but yet it had pretty good characteristics about it. And that seemed to be even more subtle in the way that they were worshiping Saul, rather than the other Apis in the time of Egypt. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on this, but I see that it's the literal they want to seek. And that's a very strong temptation for the human.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
My
that
thoughts
you
are
make an
that
idol out of other human beings because, you know,
they're
their
visible.
fellowship or their, you know, you can see them, you can hear them, you can hug them, they can hug you. But when we're looking at God, are we hugging him? Are we feeling his hugs to us? I mean, this all involves feelings as well.
Mhm.
I think this runs
Feelings,
deeper, but this is what my thoughts were when you were reading that.
feelings, emotions. As humans, I believe that we are all visual, and we're all visual learners. And
Yes.
what we see in life and what we see in pictures, illustrations, it all helps us to relate to what we cannot see.
Yes.
That's my thoughts. So I believe that's how the Apis book came into being, is because we're human.
Exactly.
We have to visualize what we can't see. You know, like when we look into a child's eyes, it's said that we're looking into God's eyes because God knows that we're visual.
Yes,
Mhm.
very true.
So when presentations have visuals, like pictures and illustrations, to me, I'm just speaking personally, I feel it's easier for me to remember and to relate and concentrate better on what's being presented. And excuse me for frog throat jumping into my throat. It does that
That's all right.
periodically. If I can get that out of there. So that's just, you know, my personal take on the Apis bowl. It's a visual thing. And we're
Yes.
all visual learner. Well, most of us, the majority of human population are visual learners. Some of us are audible. Some of us they can do just fine by reading, but I think the majority of the population are visual, and they need this visual, you know, character in front of them so that they can relate to what they cannot see.
Yes, very good. Yeah. So that we visualize this character in other people
Yes.
but mostly in God's people. They're visualizing, and we as individuals are visualizing and learning. So this
Yes.
love, the love or the character of God, continues to grow more and more strongly in us.
But imagine it also, I guess remember it also, it requires having the right mindset to how you view things as well. So even if you have a visual and you have the wrong mindset or the wrong perspective, you're not going to interpret it correctly, if that makes sense.
That's true. Very true. Yes.
I was thinking that what Elaine just said, I see the truth in both the visual and the word, but I can see, like, here was an example that came in my mind. Many people read a novel and they picture the characters in the novel just through the words of the novel. The novel has no pictures in it. And then that novel is made into a movie, and people are often very disappointed by the movie because their imagination had already conjured up what the characters should look like or be like. And so what I'm kind of trying to say is what Elaine said, is that if we have the wrong mindset, the pictures that we see might produce the wrong motive, or I think that's why it's so important even that you're reading today, Anna, because the words, when we're guided in the right way, God is producing a new ideal in our mind, a new image of himself for us in our mind. And the words can be very, very powerful even without any pictures added to them.
This is true. This is a good point. Yes, I agree with that as well. Mm. Okay, anyone else before I move on? Please feel free to jump right in whenever your heart guides you to. Where was I? Keep going here. I think I read that. Okay, so the next one is this. Okay. So in this history, the Omega history, what are the Pharisees holding to? The Sabbath. That is what makes them particularly a peculiar people. In this history, they don't see themselves as having anything in common with Egypt or Babylon or Rome. They are the special people, the people drawn out and separated from these nations. After coming out of Babylon, they built walls between themselves and other nations. There goes that frog again. Sorry about that. They saw themselves as peculiar covenant people, and the major part of that was that they had the Sabbath truth. The Sabbath was given to them to honor and protect. So when you come down to Omega history, is Sabbath a testing question? No, it is not the testing question. Was there any danger of the Jews breaking the Sabbath? No, it was not a threat in this history. Egypt? Definitely. Babylon? There was a risk of not keeping the Sabbath, but not this history, not Omega history. In fact, the person who was to prepare them to give the message to the Gentiles, which we line up, by the way, with the Sunday law, has that got anything to do with the Sabbath? No, because of his, I assume here she's speaking about Jesus, mission. What is he charged with? There's three specific things that Christ is accused of. The first one is Sabbath breaking. They're saying he does not honor the Sabbath. The second one is that he is accused of dishonoring the prophet Moses. The third one is sedition. What is the charge of sedition? Sedition is the accusation of making a political movement that is opposed to certain political government, being a political movement that is opposed to the government of the glorious land. I want us to be aware of these three accusations that come against Christ in this history when the Sabbath is not their danger and not their test. When they go to the Gentiles, does the Sabbath stop being a prerequisite to baptism? No. In 34 AD, when they go to the Gentiles, if one of these Gentiles is being baptized, he is required to accept the Sabbath. I think that should be that. I'm not sure. There is no change in the position, but he still faces the accusation of breaking the Sabbath. They would receive the false teacher because he flattered their pride by sanctioning their cherished opinions and traditions. But the teaching of Christ did not coincide with their ideas. It was spiritual and demanded the sacrifice of self. Therefore, they would not receive it. They were not acquainted with God. And to them, his voice through Christ was the voice of a stranger. And any thoughts, comments, insights? Or should I just move on? I see that there's something in the chat, but I can't grab a hold of it.
Yeah, Anna,
Yes.
Christ didn't really fit their prototype, did he? So
Yeah.
if you just go back up a bit, so I can just recall.
Sure. Where to stop?
Yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah, his teaching didn't coincide with their ideas, did it? So, and even John the Baptist too, because he had the wrong understanding of
Right.
what Christ's ministry was to be like, in opposed to a conquering king. He came as a servant. So, yeah, really didn't fit their what they viewed the Savior or the Messiah was going to be.
The ape was bull, right?
Yeah, the wrong understanding has to be changed so you have the right mindset. When you have the right mindset, you're going to be in agreement with what Christ says.
Amen.
If I said that right.
No, it makes sense to me. Yeah. A lot to think about, isn't it? And history repeats itself, doesn't it? Okay, anyone else? That was really good, Luke. Thank you for chiming in. So I think I left off here. Because Christ would not bring a message that agreed with their cherished opinions and traditions, then they have rejected him. At the same time, they would accept a false teacher who sanctioned their cherished opinions and traditions. Because they are not acquainted with God, they cannot recognize Christ. They don't understand the kingdom. They have cherished opinions and traditions about the kingdom, so they cannot recognize the king. Christ says, had ye believed Moses, Jesus says, ye would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if ye believed not his writings, how shall ye believe my words? It was Christ who had spoken to Israel through Moses. If they had listened to the divine voice that spoke through their great leader, they would have recognized it in the teachings of Christ. Had they believed Moses, they would have believed him of whom Moses wrote. So Eve, though they cherished their prophet, they are descendants of Abraham, Moses. These are their fathers. And lift them up. It was Christ who spoke to Israel through Moses. If they had listened to the divine voice that spoke through their leader, they would have recognized the teachings of Christ. Had they believed Moses, they would have believed him who Moses wrote. We have talked about it before. Where in the writings of Ellen White do you find about the dangers of vaccines and the danger of Illuminati, the danger of secret societies that are united behind every earthly government? You don't find them. They don't exist. These ideas, we do not find them in the writings of our prophet, just the same as the ideas of the Pharisees. What they held on to, you cannot find in the writings of Moses. These are their cherished opinions and traditions that have been accepted as a part of our faith, as if they were writings of our prophet, but they are not there. But they are not. Yeah, but they are not there. And because he does not reinforce or sanction their cherished opinions and traditions, he is accused of dishonoring the prophet, breaking the Sabbath, and being a political movement opposed to the government of the glorious land. Many words on this that I just wrote, that I just read. Any ideas, insights? Take a little pause here for anyone to chime in. Or I can just go on to the next slide. Okay. Okay, so I shall read on. I am making the direct compare and contrast. And you know this movement is being accused of being against the Sabbath, not because we don't require it for baptism, not because we won't insist on keeping the Sabbath, but because we don't see it as a great test of our history of the 144,000, just as it was the test at the end of the ancient Israel. It is not at the end of modern Israel. We are accused of dishonoring the prophet because how we read and understand her writings the same way Christ was accused of dishonoring Moses and being a political movement opposed to the government of the glorious land. They misunderstand the nature of the kingdom, therefore, they misunderstand the nature of the king. Therefore, they don't find themselves prepared for the test. The exact same history is being repeated with the modern Israel. 1888, 1687.1. With many there is, I guess this is a quote from 1888, 1687.1, hence the colon here. With many there is an apparent desire to be much in prayer with God, and yet when the word comes from the Lord, they are startled into resistance, and they exclaim against it. And the messenger, as did the Jews, saying, he is tearing away the very pillars of our faith. In their blindness, they do not comprehend what constitute the pillars of genuine faith. So this is the 1888 history. In this history, Ellen White is facing the accusation that she is dishonoring Sabbath. The reason is because of the doctrine of righteousness by faith. 1888 externally is all about Sunday laws, blue laws in the United States, and everywhere, and everyone knows and being told, Ellen White is telling them, we are under the cry of the third angel. So she is speaking in the same time period about people who believe that they are safe in the 1888 history of the Sunday laws. They think they are safe because they have the Sabbath. And she says they are dividing up the third angel's message. Is the third angel's message the Sabbath truth? Yes, but not only. The third angel's message constituted of multiple truths. And when they accepted the Sabbath and rejected other elements of the third angel's message, they are in a false sense of security. She said they will fall. So, even in the history of Sunday laws, there is more than Sabbath truth. And that brings against those bringing the other truths, the accusations of dishonoring the Sabbath and tearing away the pillars of our faith. And her point is, those making that accusation in their blindness do not comprehend what constitutes the pillars of our faith. The answer to all of this, once we get to our history, is parable teaching, to take the literal and explain the spiritual. And that is exactly what we are doing now, taking the ancient Israel, the literal, to give us more understanding of the spiritual. So we are doing this literal to spiritual. But are we doing something else? We are doing a compare and contrast with our alpha history to our omega history. So literal to spiritual, but also literal alpha. The beginning explains the end to Omega. Any thoughts? Comments? Insights?
I do. I don't know. I'm not sure if I caught this exactly the first time around, but they accused Ellen White of breaking the Sabbath the same way they accused Christ of breaking the Sabbath. And the way they idolize the Sabbath, it's almost like they've made the Sabbath their God. Even going so far as to crucify God, Christ, right, on the cross, but be sure they had him off the cross before the Sabbath. And you can see that, I do anyway, with Advent who are still in the structure, who keep in touch with me. They always make a point to text me on the Sabbath. But it's like that's their whole message, really, in a nutshell. They've lost all the other elements of the truth. And I can see now when Christ was in that field. Remember when the Pharisees accused him when he took the disciples in the field, that he was breaking the Sabbath by when they were picking the wheat. But he was correcting their understanding. He was giving them the cure to see the truth. Anyway, that's what I was thinking when you were reading that.
Great thoughts, yeah. Because it's not just about the Sabbath, is it? It's got other elements in there. So,
Yes.
great thoughts. Thank you, Susan. Anyone else? Anyone that wants to help me explain this? Come on. Or I can just continue. Oops. Okay, I will continue. So we also need to learn from our Alpha history. From September last year, I spent much time on the end of ancient Israel and explaining the fractals within that history, the two calls for the church, and then the call for the world. The whole gospel into the book of Acts, explaining the history before they go to the Gentiles in the spiritual, explaining the history that leads up to the Sunday law when we go to the world. That has been labored. What we are doing now, more and more, is focusing of this history, our alpha, our beginning as it explains the end. So just as ancient Israel, we have failure, success. In the Alpha history, they went into Laodicea condition, and it resulted in failure. 1888 also resulted in failure and gave a good deal of Pharisaism. Did I say that right? Pharisaism? In the Adventist church, setting up the walls between us, and not just those other Protestant religions who want to bring a Sunday law, but also we built these brick walls between the good, holy Adventists who keep our garments to show our morality. Essentially, it is the same ideas of Pharisaism. They didn't just separate themselves from pagan nations. They saw themselves as holy compared to all those unholy Jews who were as moral as they were. You can see conservative Adventism. You can see it line upon line. It fits, have gone down the same road. Coming back to the 1798, we want to see what happened here. There was this split within Protestantism. It really rose up in the First Great Awakening in the early 1700s, but it is all these external events, such as American Revolution, French Revolution, Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, the forming of the United States. In all of these massive momentous external events, you have those political changes impacting Protestantism. If you have free thought, inherent rights, and freedom within the states throughout, I think that's supposed to be throughout the government. Oh, through the government. Okay, I'm missing a space here. Government, what about in our church and your freedom of thought within the church? So this begins to divide Protestantism into these factions. Everyone is aware of these momentous events. So prior to it, you have the beginning of the Second Great Awakening. And this is a second great religious revival within Protestantism. And this revival isn't going to stay purely religious. It is going to also show not just two religious camps, but two political camps. And they are best summarized in the 1800 election, 1798 being the lead up to the election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. So in 1800, you have George Washington as president, John Adams for one term, and now John Adams is running for his second term as president, but he has a rival, Thomas Jefferson. Here's the board work.
Anna,
Yes.
I have a comment, and maybe someone else who's listening could help me with this, but I'm sort of seeing this. I saw this when Elaine was presenting, and you're doing the follow-up on the previous paragraph where there was the split, and the one side was recognizing that they now had the freedom of thought, right? Because they'd been prevented from reading the Bible for themselves and interpreting the Bible for themselves. And the other side was fearful of that. They didn't want the people to have that freedom because then it would take away their power, their priestly power, and their control over the people. And so you can see that as good, that the people were coming out from under that control and that they were now having this freedom. But now, and that's simple, right? But now with the studies that Elder Tess is doing, I'm beginning, and don't even really know how to verbalize it, but I'm beginning to see that that's too simple still yet. Because if we're given that freedom, it makes me think of that title of her one presentation, Do We Have the Freedom? And so I'm now seeing that that freedom can also run amok, right? If it's not aligned with what we were saying, the right motivation, the right purpose, the right spirit. But you can see it was necessary initially that split happened so that the people would be able to pick up and read for themselves. But now you can see, at least that's what I think I see, that God is refining that position now for us. Wondered if anyone could understands what I'm saying and maybe can add something to that.
Yeah, anybody want to piggyback off of Susan's thoughts there? I think this is a great discussion.
So I will. Susan, so are you saying that the split was a positive thing because of what came out of it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
But I can now see that the freedom that initiated the split, that was good, but sort of like what Elder Tess was showing with libertarianism, if you saw that presentation, Jackie, that the most recent presentation, all those points that she listed, we would sign up for at least most of those points. I was
Yes, I
on
saw
board
that.
with. But yet it was shown how that is a funnel, so to speak, for a false form of freedom that subjugates equality. And so now I'm seeing that freedom can only go so far, right? It has, anyway, that's what I was trying to explain, is that it was good initially, but it can go too far to the other extreme, this freedom.
But then again,
If you-
somebody else going to say something?
Yeah, if you think about in the Millerite history, what we've learned is that Miller was preaching, his preaching was among this stream of Protestantism. And that's where Ellen White went and heard Miller preach. You remember that? So they had to come out of one and then come out of there and into Millerite movement and then continue to progress. And that's what God's been doing with us,
Right.
is come out of one and then continue to, then you have to get in. How she says that it was that coming out of the one was easy. I think that's the word Susan used, but it gets more complex as you go. You don't just stay there. You have to keep moving and keep going forward and keep growing, and the path becomes more and more narrow.
Yeah.
You have to be able to have the mind of Christ to be able to see. And I put in the chat, going back to the nature of humanity, the new heart, if I said it right, Phil can correct me, the new heart equals the new mind, new motives, and new purposes. So then you're able to hear, as it said in here, that they didn't hear, they could not hear God in God's voice. I don't remember how it worded it in Christ, because they were trapped in their traditions and their own mindset, and they didn't want to come out of that mindset. So you have to come out of one mindset, and it's like you travel through the next one and have to then analyze that next mindset, which is a lot harder to break down, which is, if I'm understanding correctly, what she's doing in those Vespers classes is now breaking that down.
Yeah, thank you
Yes.
for that, Elaine. That gives more detail from what Susan raised, her thoughts, and what started this conversation. The problem is those that don't want to change the mindset are hanging on to selfishness. I mean, to just make it basic and simple. It's not wanting to give up something that you value, that is involved with not going forward and progressing. Would you say that?
I was re-listening to some of the Portugal classes and talking about not wanting to give up Jacob's time of trouble, not wanting to give up your cherished sins, and that pressure comes on you to to let go of those cherished sins. So I'm just relaying from that thought, the path, being able to fit through that path, you have to give up everything for this,
Right.
for this message, and everything for the sake of others.
Yeah, it's the habits and practices.
And you can't be a help to others if you don't let go of those things yourself. If we can't be a help to others if we don't let go of those cherished things ourselves, cherished ideas, cherished thoughts, cherished sins, cherished, anything that is not in accordance with heavenly principles and values. If you're going to hold on to them, you're not going to fit through the path.
Yes, fitting through the needle,
Yeah.
the thread. Yeah, very
And how
good.
can you help others if you don't surrender those things?
Yes. And you can't claim ignorance.
No.
I didn't know. Yeah, that's a good thought.
Mhm. Excellent. And change is hard. You know, and you got to be willing to do the hard, the difficult. Okay, great. Anyone else?
Yeah, so we know that this issue between equality and freedom is more complex than we thought, and we're just learning. And so, you know, the conservatives, you know, they want to conserve what they have, right? So, and the liberals. So let's take the God's word, the knowledge of God's word, for example. You know, the conservatives, Protestants, they, you know, they were interested in the preachers, right, having all the knowledge, all the knowledge, so they can preach to others. And so, who has the freedom here? It's the preachers, the conservative preachers, who want to hold that power over the society, over the masses, because, you know, because they have the power to do so, because they claim to know God's word. So they're the only ones who have freedom. But the masses do not have that freedom because they're getting their message from somebody else. Whereas the liberal Protestants, they said, hey, now you can read the Bible for yourself. We're all equal. You know what I know what you know. And so now, then that's the difference between equality and freedom. Freedom is for the few to oppress the masses, whereas equality, everybody is free to a certain given limit. I can do for you what you can do for me. Do unto others what you would have, you know, what you want to do, others do to you. And, you know, and you can take that to the biblical stories where, you know, they were like Cain. He had absolute freedom to kill Abel, and he did. But that's not equal, because Cain was not able to, because Abel was not now able to kill Cain. He was dead. There's no equality there. When they stoned Stephen, it was the powerful who oppressed and killed Stephen. And Stephen couldn't kill those who stoned him because he was already dead. No freedom there. I mean, no equality there. Whereas if you look at Christ's example, he had every right to stone the adulteress, and he treated her as his equal, and he did not stone her. And so, you know, there's that equality that we're just beginning to understand, that it's just so beautiful. And you know, it has no hint of oppression. You know, when we finally go to the masses, to the Levites and to the world, we're bringing everybody up to our level so that we can all be equal. I don't know, you know, I'm not holding anything back. What knowledge that was given to me, freely give to others what you have received. And that brings the masses, when we go out to the Levites and to the Nethinims, up to our level. So there's equality there. Now, if I hold anything back to think that, I better hold just a little bit back so I have a little bit more knowledge than they do, so that, I can keep preaching to them. That's freedom for me, but that's not equality. And so I'll be condemned for that. But if I share everything that I know to bring up the masses to my level, then we're equal. And that's what I'm beginning to understand. That's it.
Thank you, Phil. Anything else? Do you want to continue? Keep going with your thought. I didn't mean to interrupt you, so if you wanted to continue, please.
Oh, I'm done. Thank you for listening.
Oh, okay. Okay, Phil. Thank you very much. That was a very good thought. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, I will carry on then. Okay, we showed how these also show the division within the Protestantism. The old conservative guard supporting Adams because he was a strong religious, not just personally religious man, but also defending it through the state. We read quotes by Jedediah Morse explaining how the United States was as Israel came out of Egypt, found freedom. So was the United States found freedom from Great Britain. So they saw themselves as being in that dangerous period just after finding freedom. Israel from Egypt and United States from Great Britain. What we're doing, they are taking the literal story and making a literal story. Because if you have Israel come out of Egypt, then what does success of Israel depend on? It depends entirely on their keeping the moral code, that they have to keep the Saturday Sabbath. If they don't keep the Saturday Sabbath, what's going to happen to the nation? They will be destroyed. So if the United States individually don't keep the Sunday Sabbath and demonstrate that from the highest levels of government, what is going to happen? They are going to be destroyed as a nation. This is the thinking that is going to lead us to the 1888 and blue laws. John Adams is not doing well as a president. One fellow from YouTube, John Green, Crash Course US History, he describes John Adams as the greatest thing about John Adams as president was to hand over power. He is not looked that kindly on in history. And in part of it was he had this very monarchical, how do I pronounce that one? Monarchical view of the role of a US president. Alexander Hamilton, he is on the US $10 bill. Obama wanted to remove him from the bill, but they scrapped those plans and kept him on the bill. Alexander Hamilton was one who formed the Federalist Party. So John Adams is from the Federalist Party. Thomas Jefferson is the Democratic Republican Party, the Democrat Republican Party. This 1800 election is the first election in the United States when you have two formed political parties running candidates. So the very first time you see the same dynamic as you would expect to have today. So you have John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Behind John Adams, you have this fellow, Alexander Hamilton, who has been quite famous. And Alexander Hamilton so surely viewed the success of the US as needing a very strong presidential power, he wrote most of the Federalist Papers. It is an interesting bit of history. What happened in this election? John Adams was so unpopular because of what he did in 1798, the Alien and Sedition Acts. These two sides, the Federalist side, Adams, opposed to the Democratic Republicans. One of the things that divides them is allegiance to foreign powers. The Federalists supported Great Britain. The Democrat Republicans supported France. So you have the support of Britain and the support of France. They want to support Britain because they want trade, political connections, etc. Thomas Jefferson's side supported France because of the French Revolution and the ideals of freedom. So there is this division between supporting Britain and supporting France. They are divided by the number of these dynamics. So as Alexander Hamilton is supporting John Adams, knowing he is not going to do well in this election, and there is many French immigrants coming to the US. So what do you want to do when you have an immigrant French population who isn't going to vote for you? You want to start to curtail the rights of the immigrants to vote. That is partly what is behind the 1798 Alien and Sedition Acts. The alien being the immigrants to the United States, particularly targeting French immigrants. So John Adams wants to prevent those immigrants to be able to vote in the next election, because those immigrants are largely French and they are going to support Jefferson, who is allied to French interests, as opposed to Adams, who is allied to the interests of Great Britain. So in 1798, he wants to start taking or restricting the rights of immigrants into the US. He makes it 5 years before an immigrant is allowed to become a citizen and vote. He extends to 14 years, and there is also Sedition Act. Multiple people who spoke against his government said mean words about him in newspapers, or there was a drunk man who shouted something offensive to one of his politicians in his administration. They were imprisoned, they received extensive fines, and there was quite a number that were imprisoned under those Sedition Acts. You were not allowed to speak against the government. That was also very unpopular. Wow. Any thoughts?
I was just thinking of an article I read yesterday, but thinking about the voting, how they want to prevent certain people from voting in order for them to win. And we saw that as well in a lot of when we were reading all those A.T. Jones documents back quite a while back, that there's always this wanting to control the voting and who can and can't vote. And we see the same thing with the voting issues today, all the restrictions and the laws that are coming up in the battle that is taking place to control the voting.
Cool. Anyone else, or should I move on? I'll give a little time for someone to put their comments or bring forth their comments if they want to. Okay, continuing on. So Hamilton supporting John Adams. Thomas Jefferson is running for this election in 1800 and running with another fellow, Burr. But the election system in the US hadn't been very well refined. There were many problems with that election system. When this side, the Democrat Republicans, wins and Federalists lose, there is a split in the Electoral College vote. There is equal number going to go to Burr, and equal number go to Jefferson. That is either one of them, that either one of them could become president. This is because they haven't refined their system, and it still wasn't clear who would be president and who would be vice president. So Jefferson and Burr vote is split, and no one knows how to solve it. So Alexander Hamilton, who was on this side of the equation, now that his party had lost the election, he throws his support behind Jefferson and says mean things about Burr, which leads to 1804, when Burr has had enough of Hamilton and challenges him to a duel, and Burr kills Hamilton. And it is because of his treatment of Burr in this 1800 election. So there is a split between the Federalist Party, John Adams, and Democrat Republican Party, Thomas Jefferson. We showed how this also shows the split within Protestantism. Jedediah Morse supporting the literal to literal view. They see Jefferson as anti-God, atheistic power. That is essentially satanic. And they subscribe to him the conspiracy theory of the Illuminati, that he is part of the Illuminati, and because Hamilton was being quite mean to John Adams, they also say that Hamilton was a part of the Illuminati. So you can see how they have created this deep state. He is saying it doesn't matter what political party you belong to. Hamilton is a part of the Illuminati. Jefferson is a part of the Illuminati. That is why he says the Illuminati is based in the home state of Hamilton and the home state of Thomas Jefferson. It is essentially idea of a deep state. There aren't these two political parties. Instead, you have this enriched deep state behind them, which is essentially satanic power. It is against the government and the will of God, and our only hope is John Adams. It just becomes interesting when you bring that into our day and you start seeing this idea of a deep state, this satanic union that crosses political parties. Any thoughts? Comments? Ideas? Oh. No? Okay. So going on, this literal to literal interpretation leads Jedediah Morse to make the astounding claim that the success of the nation depends on enforcement of Sunday keeping in the United States. They are also using conspiracy theories, this idea of a deep state that is intentionally behind the scenes. This division of the Protestantism that didn't go away, it extended down into the history of the 1850s, when there is a discussion about slavery starts reaching a dangerous pitch inside America. The end of the studies in Portugal, we discussed the 1844 election, and Henry Clay stated that the church division within Protestantism was the greatest source of danger to the US. What this senator is saying is that the greatest threat that the US currently faced with was the split within Protestantism over the issue of slavery. The great external threat of this history split Protestantism. Before 1888, the Methodist Church was the largest organization in the United States outside the federal government. It split officially in 1844. A strong cord tying North and South was cut. 94% of Southern churches belonged to one of the three major bodies that were torn apart suddenly in a religious sense. The South was set adrift from the Union. So the churches split between North and South before the states split between North and South. Civil War Times Illustrated explains that the church divisions helped crack America's delicate union in two by severing the religious ties between North and South. The schism bolstered the South's strong inclination towards secession from the Union. It helped bring about a breakup of the national political parties, which splintered into factions, and the shattering of the parties led to the breakup of the Union itself. The divided churches also reshaped American Christianity. Important new denominations such as Southern Baptist Convention formed, and Christianity in the South and its counterpart in the North headed in different directions. Southern believers who are drawn on the literal words of the Bible to defend slavery increasingly promoted the close literal reading of Scripture. So what is the South doing? They are using the same methodology as used by Jedediah Morse. It is literal to literal reading of Scripture. Israel comes out of Egypt. You have to enforce morality. John Adams was a candidate who they had hope in doing that. He didn't succeed to do that. Israel goes into the promised land. It is instructed by God to practice slavery. Literal to literal interpretation. This article is recent. It says only 9 years ago, Southern and Northern Presbyterians reunited. So it is only in our lifetime that Presbyterians reunited, about 125 years after the end of the Civil War. Few observers expect reunion between Northern and Southern Baptists. American Christianity began to feel the aftershocks of a war that ended 125 years ago. It is over this interpretation of the Bible, this side saying we must read literal to literal, and therefore, as the United States is Israel, we have to practice slavery, segregation, and all of these things practiced by ancient Israel. I want to quote Samuel Morse, Jedediah Morse's son and co-inventor of the telegraph system, the Morse code. In the 1850s, Morse became well known as a defender of slavery, considering it to be sanctioned by God. This was a position held by many Southerners and others. In his treatise, how do you say this? In his treatise, I don't know. Any help? Do anybody know how to say this word?
Treatise. No, treatise.
Treatise. Okay, thank you. An argument on the ethical position of slavery, he wrote. My creed on the subject of slavery is short. Slavery per se is not sin. It is a social condition ordained from the beginning of the world for the wisest purposes, benevolent and disciplinary by divine wisdom. The mere holding of slaves, therefore, is a condition having per se nothing of moral character in it, any more than being a parent, or employer, or ruler. So Jedediah's son, Samuel Morse, continues the same exact methodology as he becomes a defender of slavery in 1850s. And his explanation of it is, it was designed by God's divine wisdom all the way back at the beginning of the world, heading down to ancient Israel to the time of Noah. This is the thinking of the South. It is the literal to literal interpretation of Scripture. And we understand that Ellen White, our pioneers, and also a whole branch of Protestantism disagreed with that literal to literal interpretation and stood on the right side of the slavery question. Any thoughts so far? Discussion? Explanation? Anyone? Okay. All right, I will continue reading then. Just jump in anytime. You can interrupt me anytime you want to, or anytime you have a burning desire to share something. Okay, so going on, 1888. The same thing happened in 1888. You don't have Protestant schism occur, but you still have the split. Not every Protestant denomination or pastor supported the enforcement of Sunday laws through the government. Protestants, literal to literal. A.T. Jones has explained it clearly. The preachers are the successors of the prophets. This throws a flood of light upon the whole situation. Anciently, the prophets made known the ones whom God had appointed to office. The same will now be done by the preachers. And obviously, no preachers can so fittingly assume this task as those who have so long recognized and advocated its necessity. And thus is seen the purpose of the demand for a Christian government. This must be a government of God. It must therefore be a government by Christian officials. The officials must therefore be chosen by the preachers. In short, if only this is made a government of God, we, the preachers, will do the governing. And that is what we want and are determined to have. AMS, February 20, 1896, 59.6. So what is AMS? Hello?
I think it's American Sentinel, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
I might be wrong.
So is that right? Okay. So in ancient Israel, you will have a king, and the king is told what to do by the prophets who are instructed by God. If the king disobeys, what happens to the nation? Destruction. So when you bring that down to modern Israel, you have the president. And the president then will have to be instructed by the preachers. And if he disobeys the preachers, what will happen? The government of Israel was a theocracy. The will of God was made known to the rulers by prophets. The ruler compelled the officers of the law to prevent the ungodly from selling goods on the Sabbath. This government is to be made a theocracy. The preachers are the successors of the prophets, and they are to compel the officers of the law to prevent all of the selling of goods and all manner of work on Sunday. This shows conclusively that these preachers intend to take the supremacy into their own hands, officially declare the will of God, and compel all men to conform to it. CGRAS. Anybody know what that is? I'm seriously asking because I don't. What is CGRAS?
I don't know which reference it is, but I'm pretty sure it was A.T. Jones writing, because it was the same reference she gave. She's just stating some things that were in the presentation I did, but I don't remember what that stands for.
Okay.
It's
At 103 point. Okay. So they must do it through the laws of the land, which is why we have the Sunday laws in this history. It is literal to literal reading of the scriptures. And behind it is also that the current leadership, unless this is enforced, there is a deep state that is satanic unless they clean up their act and enforce morality. Coming down to our history is what we have seen from the 1790s through the formation of our faith through the 40s and 50s. But the split within Protestantism is what we saw in the 1860s, when in 1863, when we had the national reform movement start, and then in 1880s history, which is Sunday laws. It is the same thread of Protestantism, but it is not all Protestantism. There is a distinct split within Protestantism, and you need to know where to look. What characterizes their belief system? Coming down to the omega of ancient Israel, there are many different denominations within Protestantism and subsets of beliefs. We are looking at what type of methodology and mindset that unites them. Coming down to 1989, we have spoken at length about Jerry Falwell and the moral majority. If you were to look at Jerry Falwell and someone like Billy Graham, they disagree on many parts of their faith, but there are things that united them, that made these leaders work together. What I want to discuss here is dominion theology. This is the type of theology that grew out of 1960s and 70s. I am going to define the dominion theology, and then I'm going back to the article that was read, the first Zoom meeting that was not taped, from Wikipedia, dominion theology. They can be theologically diverse, but we are going to a particular one that today has gained a lot of power, and that is the new apostolic reformation. So this belief back here led Jedediah Morse that the U.S. is like Israel, a Christian nation. Continued through the history of 1850s and 60s, that is the history of slavery, and 1880s, it is the same, literal to literal. It is Christian nation. It is the same mindset in dominion theology. U.S. is a Christian nation. They see a nation governed by Christians based on understanding of the biblical law. It is just a Christian version of Sharia law. If you think of an Islamic state, all that an Islamic state will do is say, we have these writings, and we should make sure that Islamic religious laws are enforced by the state. They wish to see a political government instituting and reinforcing Islamic law. That is the definition of Sharia law. This is what some Islamic countries are doing. The idea of a nation governed by Christians based on their understanding, not Sharia law, but biblical law. If you a proponent of dominion theology, you are doing what they are doing, except instead of Islamic law, you are promoting Christian law. The new apostolic reformation that began in 1970s is all part of the same string, moral majority, Jerry Falwell, etc. In fact, the head of majority. I want to expand the part of history that led up to 1889. Got a little dyslexic there, sorry. Prior to 1798, they are all these external events, and meantime, the Protestant world is taking note of these external events, and Protestant revival is taking place, particularly the interest in the books of Daniel and Revelation. So we have a reformation within the Protestantism as these external events are happening, and they turn to the books of Daniel and Revelation, and it creates a second great awakening prior to 1798 and leading into that history. Okay, before I go on, I want to pause again and ask if there's anything that anybody wants to say. I see that there are things in the chat. Whoever wrote those, do you want to actually speak it out loud to us?
They just gave the reference, civil government and religion, but we got 30 minutes left. and,
Oh dear.
And another long
And
afternoon. So it's been a whole back-to-back, a bunch of long ones. So
gosh, and I thought this was fairly short, being it was only 31 slides.
yeah.
Okay, I'll move on here.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, the world as we know it is coming to an end. It's the end of the world. Not because some general or madman will push a button, oh dear, and reduce our planet to poisonous ash, oh dear. And not because the weight of a burgeoning population will cause it to lurch out of orbit. Rather, the end is near because God has had it planned that way for at least 1900 years. It's all right there in the Bible, in Daniel and Revelation, with auxiliary illumination from other key portions of Scripture. Just as surely as he created a fully furnished universe out of nothing in 6 24-hour days, approximately 5986 years ago, so is he now about to bring it to completion in precise accord with the detailed blueprint tucked away in his word. So there is a renewed interest in Daniel and Revelation prior to 1798. Judeo-Christian history has seen numerous outcroppings of interest in biblical prophecy, usually in times of social upheaval, but few, if any, have been as widespread and influential as that now flourishing in conservative Protestant circles. So again, there are liberal Protestants and conservative Protestants. And which one is being drawn to Daniel and Revelation? Conservative ones. No hard data are available, but millions of American evangelicals apparently believe that within the present generation, and probably sometime in the 1980s, Jesus will return to lay the groundwork for a glorious 1,000-year reign here on earth. Hundreds of Bible-believing preachers discuss the chronology of these latter days with confidence that what they are saying is as familiar and real to their congregations as the stories of Noah's Ark and the birth of Jesus. The same themes are proclaimed by such leading television evangelists as Oral Roberts, Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, Rex Humbard, Herbert W. Armstrong, Kenneth Copeland, and Jack Van Impe, and on such lesser known programs as The Voice of Prophecy, The King is Coming, and 1159 and Counting. A couple of these names we should be familiar with: Jerry Falwell, Pat Robinson, Kenneth Copeland. These people are leading today in the Dominion theology movement that has gained more and more traction in the last years. We are seeing what led directly to what we have today. Hal Lindsey, he is named on one of the best-selling authors of the decades. His book, The Late Great Planet Earth, has sold 15 million copies. So these prophetic books about the end of the earth are becoming so popular. Though its growth has occurred mostly within the past 2 decades, this movement, based on biblical prophecy, had its roots in the 19th century. So he's going to take us from 1989 back to 1800s. The French Revolution and its aftermath has kindled interest in prophecy as biblical students saw the destruction of papal power, the secularization of the state, and the rise of a religion of reason as being remarkably similar to events described in Daniel and Revelation. I will mark 1773 because it ties what is happening in Europe and America. It is not just the French Revolution, but also the rise of the United States and secular non-religious government of freedom. These external events also renew interest in Daniel and Revelation. So this Atlantic article is tying these two histories together, taking us back to our Alpha history. Millenarian thought as also flourished in the United States during the 19th century. The most notable millenarian during the first half of the century, however, was William Miller, a prolific writer who held camp meetings and tent revivals that built him a following estimated at 50,000 people. And he makes some mistakes about some of the tenets of our faith here when talking about William Miller. But he is describing what happened in the Second Great Awakening, and he sees that the most notable member of this history is William Miller and his interpretation of biblical science. Miller believed so strongly in his ability to interpret biblical signs that he confidently selected 1843 as the year Christ would return in fiery judgment. His willingness to set dates drew tremendous interest, but ultimately brought his movement to ground and subjected him to ridicule and charges of fanaticism and quackery. Eventually, millenarians learned to avoid the embarrassments of overspecification, and by 1875, with the evangelist D.L. Moody as a prominent public spokesman, the movement grew into a supra-denominational community characterized by an ecumenical spirit that did not require commitment to any specific interpretive scheme. The most widely held view of the end time, however, was a premillennial theory, sorry about that, so called because it taught that Jesus would return before the millennium. Developed by an Englishman, John Nelson Darby, and incorporated into the Schofield Reference Bible, an enormously influential book published by the Oxford University Press in 1909. The beliefs of the Protestants in that history revolved about millennium, so he is going to give a description. After the rapture, a 7-year period of tribulation will fall on those left behind. It will begin with the appearance of the Antichrist as leader of a 10-nation confederation. So I grew up in a situation where I had access to hearing different conservative trains of thought, from those who believed the church was Babylon, to conservative youth conferences, to Walter Veith, and those who supported him. These various groups, who not necessarily agree with each other, but I had access to the various Adventist conservative schools of thought. And as I read this article, what interested me is how precise the Protestant view of the end of the world is, and while we disagree with many parts of it, how much we have in common. They believe that the Antichrist is a leader of the 10-nation confederation. What is their view? What is their view the United States nations will be? Not very favorable. He will seem to be a man of peace and will side with Israel when it is threatened by a northern coalition, which is now generally expected to be led by Russia and to include Germany, the Arabs, and Iran. His help will not be needed, however, because the coalition will be so devastated by earthquakes and pestilence that it will take 7 months just to bury the corpses. This is their view of Revelation. Realization that the raptured saints, the faithful who were caught up, had been prudent to believe in Jesus will cause 144,000 Jews and a multitude of Gentiles to accept him as Savior and Messiah. These converts, together with 2 outstanding prophets, possibly Moses and Elijah brought back to life, will win others to Christ. Unfortunately, these new Christians will be marked for persecution by the Antichrist, who by this time will have begun to show his true colors. In a symbolic act so egregious that it will be known as the Abomination of Desolation, the Antichrist will enter the Temple of Jerusalem, cancel all worship services, and begin to use it as his political headquarters. In fear for their lives, many will seek refuge in the rock cliffs of the ancient city of Petra in Jordan. During the tribulation, the earth and its people will be visited by unprecedented inconvenience. Rising sea levels, 100-pound hailstones, falling stars, and fires will devastate 1/3 of the earth. The sun will become 7 times hotter than normal, then grow dark. Oceans, rivers, and lakes will turn to blood. Scorpions, locusts, and boils will plague humankind. Stupendous earthquakes will level mountains and cities, and a 200 million member of army from the east, probably from China, will kill half those who managed to survive these disasters. The Antichrist will seek total control over humanity by requiring that every person wear a mark or a number, probably 666, the designated mark of the beast, Revelation 13:16-18, in order to buy or sell. Those who refuse to accept this mark of the beast will be slain or will risk starvation because they cannot buy food. Those who accept it will burn forever in hell. Realization that the raptured saints, the faithful who were caught up and had been prudent to believe in Jesus, will cause 144,000 Jews and a multitude of Gentiles to accept him as Savior and Messiah. Didn't I already read this? I'm having a little deja vu here. Seek refuge in the rock cliffs of the ancient city of Petra. And I think this must have been typed in
Yeah, it
twice.
looks like it was in twice. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and skip over that. Let's see. During the tribulation, unprecedented. Yeah, this one was done twice too. So I remember reading that. Those accept it will burn forever in hell. With Satan out of the way. Okay. All right, I think, wait. Okay, I think this one's new. With Satan out of the way, at least temporarily, the saints will enjoy the marvelous millennium, an age characterized by good weather, peace, an end to crime, advancements in knowledge, and the absence of fear. At the end of this period, in a kind of last sporting gesture, God will give Satan one more chance to work his evil ways, and the prince of darkness will tempt and win millions of people who became Christians during the tribulation and the millennium, but who nonetheless remained open to his appeals. This army of backsliders will muster for one final battle with the faithful believers, at which time God will bring fire down upon the heretics, destroying them where they stand. Satan and all unbelievers will join the Antichrist and the false prophet in the lake of fire, where they will be tormented day and night forever. The earth will be destroyed by fire and replaced by a new heaven and a new earth, which will serve the eternal abode of the redeemed. Quite a few parts of these views coincide with conservative Adventist teaching, especially as you think of how Protestantism has had such a distrust of the United Nations, globalism, what they see as a 10-nation confederation. Since premillennial doctrine holds that deterioration in economic, political, domestic, and moral spheres will precede the second coming, many evangelicals, unsurprisingly, have felt the end of the age is near. The most important catalyst of the current boom in prophecy studies, however, has unquestionably been the political restoration of the nation of Israel. Premillennial doctrine presumes that the people of Israel will be in Palestine at the time of Christ's return. The 1917 Balfour Declaration, which permitted Jews to settle in Palestine, was widely viewed by premillennial fundamentalists as the fulfillment of Jeremiah 29:14. I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile. This belief received an enormous boost with the formal establishment of the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, the date on which, according to Hal Lindsey, the prophetic countdown began. Okay, I've got 10 more slides. Do you think I've got time to finish it, Elaine?
Probably not.
keep-
Just go as far as you can. And we'll
Okay.
figure out after that. So I know that these presentations that we did last week, mine, they're all very long ones without translators. And she talked really fast. So it really, yeah. So so just go ahead and
And
get as far as you can.
I'm trying to talk fast too. So,
Yeah.
all right, let's go as far as I can. All right, in Jesus' discussion of the signs of the end, he told his disciples that this generation will not pass away till all these things take place. Matthew 24:34. He was apparently referring to the lifetime of his errors, but since biblical lyrists cannot concede that Jesus may have been mistaken, they conclude that this generation refers to those alive when the unmistakable signs of the end begin to appear. Since they regard the restoration of Israel as such a sign, they infer that we are living in the terminal generation. The chief problem with this interpretation for several years was that Israel was supposed to be not simply in Palestine, but in control of Jerusalem as well. When this came to pass in 1967, at the conclusion of a 6-day war that seemed almost miraculous, even to many non-believers, expectation within prophetic circles grew feverish. Today, so many pieces of the puzzle seem to have fallen into place that premillennial believers display enormous confidence in their interpretive ability. Now, from 1967 forward, these conservative Protestant circles studying the books of Daniel and Revelation can see that the end is near. So they are seeing the external events, just like in 1798, when Protestant world from 1773 to 1798 in Europe and the United States. Almost any scrap of truly bad news is hailed as another sign that we are in the home stretch of history, so that earthquakes, volcanoes, and famine, Russian aggression in Afghanistan, now in Ukraine, China's emergence as a world power, the rise of OPEC, the revolution in Iran, threats against Israel, unrest in Latin America, weaknesses of the dollar, increases in abortion, explicit sex on cable television, gay rights parades, and any other perceived threats to the political, economic, or moral health of America and the world are greeted with an odd sort of self-conscious optimism. Wow, that was a mouthful. In Hal Lindsey's 1973 book, There is a New World Coming, he observes, as world conditions increasingly fall into the pattern that Jesus spoke of, it may sadden the believer, but it should give us a sense of intense anticipation that we are indeed the generation that is standing on the brink of seeing the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. In an even more upbeat vein, Christian Broadcasting Network President Pat Robertson tells supporters, "We are not to weep as the people of the world weep when there are certain tragedies or breakups of the government or the systems of the world. We are not to wring our hands and say, 'Isn't that awful?' That isn't awful at all. It's good. That is a token, an evident token of our salvation, of where God is going to take us." Wow. So they are seeing these things we are meant to see. We were meant to see the 10-year Afghanistan war. We were meant to see the revolution in Iran in 1979. These are signs for Adventists to see, to prepare us for the end, just as they were to see 1798, the fall of papacy. Millerites were to look back to 1798 and see the external events, the rising of the lamb-like beast, the fall of papal power, but we are not the only ones seeing them. What else do these Protestants see? Do these Protestants see? Increases in abortion, explicit sex on cable television, gay right parades, threats to the perceived morality of the United States. Now they are in trouble. Because if the end of the world is coming and America is a Christian nation, the new Israel, the glorious land which we also agree with, then what does the success of the nation depend on? The enforcement of morality through the government. Ooh, I got 5 minutes. All right, students of prophecy do, however, give serious attention to truly important problems such as scouting out the Antichrist and identifying the mark of the beast, since this kind of intelligence may mean the difference between an eternity in heaven and an eternity in hell. This is where the methodology is very important for us to identify. The consensus view of the Antichrist, that is, he will be a Satan-supported charismatic czar who will institute and enforce a political and economic dictatorship so complete that buying or selling will be impossible without his authorization, symbolized by some form of 666 on the hand or the forehead. The 10-nation confederation that will serve as his power base is widely identified as the common market, whose giant computer complex in Luxembourg is said to be nicknamed the Beast. Many are appalled at rumors that in a cashless and checkless society, economic transactions will require that each of us be assigned a number consisting of 3 sets of 6 digits, to be invisibly tattooed on our hands or foreheads. And some believe that the laser red computer code on supermarket goods is but one indicator that the mark of the beast is already in our midst, just waiting to be applied to humans. Wow. This Protestant thinking is preparing for the mark of the beast, and they are saying that this is tattooing into your body a certain information that allows you to buy or sell. And what did Bill Gates just prescribe to? He is suggesting some type of laser technology to imprint a mark on a human being that would give them certain identifying characteristics that information could impact whether or not a person is able to work. Bill Gates is looking at society post-COVID-19, and he is saying, in a society post-COVID-19, how will we know if we're safe if somebody is to work at a job where they are meeting many different people? So we should make sure that they are someone that are immunized or has had COVID-19 so we can be protected from it. So we can imprint into people some kind of mark to identify whether or not they are immune. So this is causing panic in some Protestant circles that they have finally identified the mark of the beast. And the mark of the beast is Bill Gates, because he is a globalist and proposing to imprint or mark COVID-19 status. That is what they are saying. Hopefully that is not what we believe, because many of us do. That is why we are worshiping the Apis bull. We have the same mindset and methodology unless we learn from parables. Back in 1982, they don't have Bill Gates with this type of technology, so they are looking at a different explanation. Particularly one woman in the early 80s. News that various forms of 666 are predominantly in use spreads through fundamentalist networks as rapidly as the false reports that worms are used in McDonald's hamburgers, or that Satan worship infests Procter and Gamble. But the most widely known collection of such information is Mary Stuart Relfe's "When Your Money Fails, the 666 System is Here," a privately printed volume that sold over 300,000 copies within 6 months of its publication in January 1981. This is Mary Stuart Relfe. I want us to consider the methodology that she uses. She is seeing the mark of the beast, the restriction on buying and selling through the new system that is being set up, globalism. How does she end her claim that the end of time is here? Her claim is that there is this deep state, and it is satanic in origin and satanically led. She will show you the documents that Olivetti, Lia Siglia, NCR computer system, shirts and clothes made in China, shoes made in Italy, parts of Caterpillar tractors have all been found bearing the 666 on their product code. She will say, look, all of these are different, are from different countries, from different companies, are all bearing satanic symbols. She will take you to their product codes. These symbols can't be a coincidence, she will say. You keep seeing 666. That must be an indication that they are all working together behind the scenes. They are all in union. It is a satanic deep state. Everybody see it?
Yeah, got it.
Okay, can everybody hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, let's continue. Hope everybody had a great lunch. I did. Okay, so continuing on. With dozens of documents and photographs to back her claims, Relfe asserts that Olivetti, Lear, Seigler, and NCR computer systems, Boss Work gloves, Scotty fertilizer, McGregor clothing, shirts made in communist China, shoes made in Italy, and parts for Caterpillar tractors have all been found bearing 666 as their product codes. Sears, JCPenney's, and Montgomery Ward are said to use computer programs that call for 666 as a prefix. The ominous number reportedly is also used by the World Bank, the IRS, Medicaid, and the Selective Service. Excuse me. Further, Relfe states that when Anwar Sadat reopened the Suez Canal to commercial navigation in 1975, he rode in a warship with 666 emblazoned boldly on its bow, and that tanks built for President Carter's Secret Service force were stamped with 666, as were metric rulers widely distributed in the US during 1979, some perhaps to school children who were using an elementary algebra book entitled 666 Jelly Beans. And in Israel, she writes, 666 is used as a prefix for Arab-owned vehicles, overseas telephone calls, and the national lottery, all as part of an effort to educate, prepare, and condition the Jews to accept 666, which will be the number of their false Messiah, the Antichrist, and his world government system. After reading this book, I felt a bit queasy at recalling that my take-home pay at the time I first developed an interest in biblical prophecy was $666.66. And that once, while living in Massachusetts, I had seen 4 nuns in a car whose license plate contained the dreaded digits. I hope you are seeing the methodology she is using. Its exact counterpart methodology is being used by Walter Veith and conservative Adventists. She shows you something and follows by Walter Veith's language. Isn't it interesting? How can this be explained? And he, Walter Veith, doesn't answer his question. He leads you to his question as if it's a thought in your own mind. How can this be? It doesn't make sense. It must be the evidence of the deep satanic state.
Okay, can I say something real quick? It's a really
Yeah,
good
absolutely.
point to remember that, and I know because I'm guilty of this along the way, and I've kind of mentioned it. But what she's stating with, looking at all these different signs, is that we've all done that at times, and we need to be, if we're not able to take those things that we think are some sort of sign, we need to take them to the line, and if we're not, then I know I need to exercise the restraint necessary, because if it is something that's going to fit on the line, God will lead Elder Tess in that direction, and we will know that it's something that, if that makes sense. because there's a lot of times we see things that we think that line up, but we may be making the same mistake of literal to literal without realizing it, how important the methodology is and the structures are to our not coming into making mistakes.
Mhm.
I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Okay, anyone else? This is a very interesting study. Nobody else has any comments? Okay, moving on. So this is back 1982, and she identifies Antichrist as being Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt. When he reopened the Suez Canal, he rode in a warship with 666 emblazed boldly on its bow. And didn't I already read that? 6664. I had seen 4 nuns in a car whose license number contained the dreaded digits. Yeah, I think this is another repeat because I just read that. Okay, we have to think about same conclusions that conservative analysts. Okay, we have to think about their methodology and where it's coming from. It is apostate Protestantism where we want to take our methodology from, and the conclusion of their methodology are many of the same conclusions that the conservative Adventism has come to. And we think that those conclusions make us special, and we're the only ones fearing this satanic deep state, and that we can prove that this is a deep state because we sit in the lecture hall in front of Walter Veith. He will show us slide after slide of secret handshakes, secret logos with satanic symbols, 666 emblazoned in secretive places to show that they are all part of the same deep state. He is a modern Mary Stuart Relfe. They use the same methodology, and despite their differences, they come to exactly the same conclusions. The false Messiah, who is expected to turn these devilish developments to his own ends, has been dedicated? No. Oh, well.
Detected.
How do you say it?
Detected.
Detected, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I know you knew that one.
Yeah, I knew that. Been detected by earlier generations in the persons of Nero, Napoleon, Mussolini, Hitler, and similar unworthies. In the 1970s, he was thought by many to be embodied by Henry Kissinger, less because Kissinger displayed any singular talent for wickedness than because, like the punitive Antichrist, he was a globe-trotting peacemaker who was gaining worldwide attention and adulation. To feed this speculation, David Weber, pastor of the Southwest Radio Church and a longtime prophecy student, noted that in a numerological system in which A equals 6, the number of man who was created on the 6th day and subsequently messed up a brand new universe, B equals 12, C equals 18, and so forth. The numerical value of Kissinger is 666. With the dimming of Kissinger's star, the world stage was ready for other likely candidates. In 1981, Relfe declared, "My prudent assessment is that President Anwar Sadat of Egypt is either history's nearest prototype or the real Mr. 666, citing in support of her theory Sadat's early admiration for Hitler and his penchant for swastika-decorated neckties." Strangely enough, none of these conservative Protestants seem concerned about Ronald Wilson Reagan. Ronald equals 6, Wilson equals 6, Reagan equals 6. He is the 666 if we use their methodology, but somehow this methodology doesn't apply to him. Why? Because he is their man. So they start advising you these secretive symbol, this confederation is united, soon will be having difficulty to buy and sell. So they started recommending move to the country, erect a shelter, plant a garden on a small plot of land outside the city. Set aside a bag of silver coins for every member of the family, so they start preaching country living. More significant, one has to consider how premillennial theology will manifest itself in the activities of the Christian New Right, many of whose members accept its tenets. Secretary of the Interior James Watt has emphatically denied that his remark to a House Interior Committee, "I do not know how many future generations we can count on before the Lord returns." So how is this teaching going to manifest itself? How is this view, "I do not know how many future generations we can count on before the Lord returns," is going to impact the government? If you are a non-Christian liberal government employee, or are you going to be concerned about the depletion of natural resources? Of course, it's a real thing. But if you are subscribed to this type of ideas, you won't be concerned about that. This is what is behind this saying, "We don't know how long we've got left." Implied that we should not be greatly concerned with long-range husbanding of natural resources. But one is hard-pressed to understand why he raised the issue if that was not precisely what he meant. Similarly, if a president were to appoint one or more premillennialists to key foreign policy posts, who at the confirmation hearings would think to probe for beliefs about the second coming, what incentive would they have to work for lasting peace in the Middle East, since they would regard a Russian-led attack on Israel as a necessary precursor of the millennium? What stance would they assume toward the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations, both which are viewed as major engines of the one world Antichrist conspiracy? And if the nuclear destruction of Russia is foreordained as in some pre-millennial schemes, might not a fundamentalist politician or general regard his finger on the button as an instrument of God's eternal purpose? If we remember one of those names we have read earlier, Ralph Drollinger, he believes only a Christian can work in the government because only a Christian conservative Protestant can have the right attitude to take these posts, including dealing with foreign nations. When the literature for these premillennials are written, they will use all types of quotes, all types of source, and refer them as being experts in their field. It is the same thing we see today when you have them quote Russia Today, one of their favorites, and refer to it as a reliable source. They were never able to discern between two streams of information. Mary Stuart Relfe will show you this satanic deep state. The growing use of numerological schemes to uncover hidden examples of 666 is often ingenious, but scarcely more compelling in its authority than Tex Ritter's classic recital about a soldier who used a deck of cards as a Bible, or accounts of peculiar coincidences in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. Mary Stuart Relfe asserts that such long lyrics as "What the world needs now is love, sweet love," and the Coca-Cola theme, "I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony." Do they want the world in perfect harmony? No, because this world harmony is the precursor to these 10-state confederation system led by the Antichrist. Mary Stuart Relfe asserts that such song lyrics as "What the world needs now is love, sweet love," and the Coca-Cola theme, "I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony," are anti-American attacks on Christian values, and she tells of being rendered immobile at learning that the Sex Pistols' irreverent "I am an Antichrist, I am an anarchist." Is that what that says? Anarchist? Yeah. Was part of the lyrics of the #1 song in England. Wow, I'm glad I didn't know that song. I sat through Walter Veith's lectures where he shows song lyrics after song lyrics to show the evidence of satanic deep state. Same methodology, same conclusions. These examples of overreaching reflect poor scholarship and faulty journalistic technique rather than inherent weakness of doctrine, and some evangelical scholars who would adhere to premillennial beliefs decry such attempts at overspecification. But even if these peculiarities could be minimized or eliminated, a great gulf would still separate premillennialists from those with less deterministic perspectives on history. Fundamentalist teachers of prophecy are fond of saying that practically all scholars or virtually all commentaries agree with their views, but this is far from the case. In fact, the biggest problem with the premillennial position is that it largely disregards the scholarship associated with major European, British, and American seminaries and graduate schools of religion, including Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Chicago, Oxford, Cambridge, Tübingen, and Marburg. These are, of course, precisely those universities accorded great esteem in the non-evangelical and secular worlds. The study of Daniel, Revelation, and similar biblical literature has enjoyed some popularity in these universities and seminaries since about 1960. It spans through both conservative and liberal university. Premillennial teaching is probably most attractive to those who feel that the world, or at least their segment of it, is out of control, make America great again, and can be brought to a good end only by concerted supernatural intervention. Such feelings of marginality are likely to be especially acute when established ways of life are being threatened. So these people feel marginalized under society, and that mindset of marginalization grew exponentially under the administration Barack Obama. When those Christian right nationalists started to feel marginalized in society, it is exactly how the South felt before the Civil War I would argue. The man who assassinated Abraham Lincoln argued that he was not angry because he wanted to own slaves, but that he felt marginalized in a society that no longer would allow him to speak favorably of slavery without feeling persecuted. This article never uses the word deep state. I put that in there to show that that is exactly what Mary Stuart Relfe is starting to teach. They might ascribe to different views of 666. They may not agree with 666 product code as being relevant, but it is the same mindset that it doesn't matter. Behind the scenes, they are all united. Doesn't matter if they are Hamilton or Jefferson, they are united in the Illuminati. And what have you to fear? The coming together of the earthly government, because it will be the tenfold union of the Antichrist. And when the Antichrist comes, it will be hard to buy and sell. You will have to move to the country. You see that happening so much more since 2019 after COVID struck. And the conspiracy theories around globalism within Protestantism, Bill Gates, and idea imprinting of a code, I learned all these in conservative Adventism. And we think we are special. We are not. The Pharisee, did they think they were special and unique? Yes, they had the Sabbath. They had walls built between them and other countries. Perhaps if they hadn't built walls between themselves and pagan Rome, they would have recognized that their thinking was identical to that of pagan Rome. They would have recognized that they were actually thinking the same way, that their idea of the first advent of Christ was the same type of Messiah as a Roman would expect if Rome was in the same position as what Rome wanted and in a Caesar. They wanted Jehovah to look like Caesar. Their ideas of God and the end are the same. Conservative Adventism may feel special and different and separate because we wear long skirts and show it through our morality, just as the Pharisees did. Because we know that the obelisk in St. Peter's Square means something else. Yeah. These conspiratorial doctrines are not found in the writings of our prophet. Those inventions are actually what ties us and shows us that we have the exact same belief system and methodology as apostate Protestantism. You see that direct link between that methodology and the conclusion she came to when you look at conservative Adventism. This is as real idolatry as the carving of the golden calf. The idolatry of the Pharisees led to the end of the Jewish nation. The idolatry of Walter Veith, I use his name as a heading, will lead to the destruction and loss of hundreds of thousands of people's salvation. People are questioning, why mention Walter Veith? Don't be divisive. Don't attack him. Just give us peace and safety message. The times for a peace and safety message are behind us. If we describe to this type of idolatry, we are subscribing to the idolatry of the Protestantism. We are worshiping the Apis bull of the ancient Israel. That is what we are to separate from, and the mechanism of that separation, as it was for ancient Israel, is parable teaching. We have looked at this history prior to 1982, and we are aware of the 10 years, 1979. External events to be recognized by Adventism, but they were for everyone. Rain fell for just and the unjust. External events are there for Protestants to see, and therefore there for Adventists to see. We know these 10 years are also 10 years of moral majority leading to Ronald Reagan. I wanted us to see where this dominionistic theology led to and how it's been demonstrated, particularly under the Trump campaign, and how it has also split Protestantism. Could you fight against slavery in this history and remain a Protestant and reject Millerite doctrine? Yeah. Did standing against slavery save you? No. 1888, Protestantism split, many Protestants fighting against a national Sunday law with a correct version of the separation of the church and state, and didn't save them. We need to understand our own history and what tests us. There are more subjects that must be understood and accepted to be a member of God's true movement. We compared and contrasted the ancient Israel and modern Israel. We also compared and contrasted the beginning of the ancient Israel with the beginning of the modern Israel. External events caused a revival that spread through the whole Protestantism. William Miller, Millerites, and Adventism was one part of that came out of that. The Protestant Revival in 79 to 89 in the US shows under teachings of Mary Stuart Relfe, Kenneth Copeland, Drollinger, and others, as they also formed the moral majority, or to retake the government, because if the United States is to be Israel at the end of the world, not literal Israel, it must be a Christian nation. Literal to literal interpretation. That is what we are finding today. And the point I am trying to drive home is that Adventism is not safe. Just as Israel thought it was separate, it was safe from paganism, so modern Israel thinks they are safe from Protestantism, and we are not. Those walls have shielded us from seeing that we are the same. We have the same idolatry.